They say the opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference. When Matthew Sterling threw the divorce papers onto the mahogany table, sneering that he had finally found a woman on his level, he expected Eliza to scream. He expected her to beg, to cry, to make a scene in front of his mistress. He wanted the satisfaction of breaking her. But Eliza, she didn't shed a single tear. She simply signed the papers, packed a small bag, and walked out into the night with a terrifying calmness. Matthew thought he had won. He had no idea that a Gulfstream G650 was already waiting on the tarmac, sent by the one billionaire Matthew feared most. Watch what happens when a disregarded wife returns not as a victim, but as a queen. The crystal chandelier above the dining table cast a fractured, shimmering light over the dinner party, but it did nothing to warm the chill in the room. It was Matthew Sterling's 40th birthday, and his wife Eliza had spent 3 days preparing the menu. She had sourced the truffles from a specific importer in Alba, she had roasted the duck exactly to his preference, and she had polished the silverware until her fingers ached. Yet as she placed the final course on the table, Matthew didn't look at her. His eyes were fixed on the woman sitting to his right, Jessica Cole. 24 years old, a junior associate at Matthew's architecture firm, and possessing a laugh that sounded like glass-breaking, sharp, shiny, and dangerous. She was wearing a dress that cost more than Eliza's entire wardrobe, a slinky emerald number that left very little to the imagination. "This duck is adequate," Matthew said, finally glancing at his wife. He swirled his wine, a vintage Cabernet he had bought for himself. "Though it's a bit dry, Eliza. You really should have watched the timer better." The guests, 3 other couples from the firm and Matthew's imposing mother, shifted uncomfortably. The duck was perfect. Everyone knew it. "I'm sorry, Matthew," Eliza said softly. Her voice was steady, betraying nothing. She sat down at the opposite end of the table. "I'll do better next time." "Next time," Matthew muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. He turned back to Jessica. "You know, Jessica was telling me about the new skyline project in Dubai. She has such a vision. It's rare to find someone who understands the soul of a building. Most people," he cast a dismissive glance toward Eliza, "are just content to live inside them." Jessica giggled, placing a manicured hand on Matthew's forearm. "Oh, stop, Matthew. You're the genius. I'm just the muse." Eliza took a sip of water. She felt the familiar dull ache in her chest, the one that had been there for 5 years. When she had married Matthew, he was a struggling draftsman with big dreams and empty pockets. She had worked double shifts at a diner to pay for his master's degree. She had edited his proposals late into the night. She had been the foundation upon which he built his empire. But now that the empire was built, Matthew had decided the foundation was too plain to be seen. The dinner progressed from awkward to unbearable. Matthew made toast after toast, praising his team, praising his mother, and praising Jessica. He didn't mention Eliza once. When the guests finally filtered out, leaving the house in a heavy silence, Eliza began to clear the table. Matthew remained seated, loosening his tie. Jessica hadn't left. She was leaning against the doorframe, sipping the last of the wine, watching Eliza like a hawk watching a field mouse. "Leave the dishes, Eliza," Matthew said abruptly. Eliza paused, a stack of china in her hands. "It will only take a moment." "I said, leave them." Matthew slammed his hand on the table. The sound echoed through the high-ceilinged room. Eliza set the plates down gently. She turned to face him. "What is it, Matthew?" Matthew stood up and walked over to where his briefcase lay. He pulled out a thick manila envelope and tossed it onto the table. It slid across the polished wood and stopped inches from Eliza's hand. "I want a divorce," he said. The air left the room. Jessica smirked, taking a slow sip of her wine. "I see," Eliza said. No gasp, no tears. "Don't you want to know why?" Matthew goaded, stepping closer. He wanted a fight. He wanted to see her crumble so he could feel justified in his cruelty. "Look at you, Eliza. Look at this domesticity. I am an artist. I am a visionary. I need fire. I need passion. You're just Background noise. Jessica understands me. She challenges me. He's outgrown you, sweetie. Jessica chimed in, her voice dripping with faux sympathy. It happens. Some people are meant to soar and others are meant to hold the string. You can let go of the string now. Eliza looked from Matthew to Jessica. She saw the cruelty in their eyes, the smug satisfaction. They expected her to fall to her knees. They expected her to remind Matthew of the nights she nursed him through the flu or the loans she took out to save his first company. Instead, Eliza reached into her pocket, pulled out a pen, and pulled the papers toward her. "Where do I sign?" she asked. Matthew blinked. His aggressive stance faltered. "What?" "The papers," Eliza said, flipping to the back page. "You've tabbed the signature lines. Very efficient. You aren't going to fight for this? For me?" Matthew stammered, his ego taking a sudden confusing hit. "You've made your choice, Matthew," Eliza said, her pen scratching smoothly against the paper. "And frankly, I'm tired of the noise." She signed her name with a flourish, Eliza Vance, not Eliza Sterling. She reverted to her maiden name instantly. She capped the pen and placed it on the envelope. "I'll take the guest cottage key off my ring. I assume you want me out tonight." "Well, yes," Matthew said, stunned. "Jessica is moving in." "Right, of course." Eliza walked past them, heading toward the stairs. She moved with a strange grace, her head high. "You're not taking the car," Matthew called after her, trying to regain control. "The Mercedes is in my name." "I know," Eliza said without turning back. "I don't need it." "And you're not getting a dime of alimony if you leave tonight," he shouted. "I have the best lawyers in the city." Eliza stopped on the first step. She turned slowly. Her eyes were different. The dullness was gone, replaced by a cold, hard diamond light. "Keep your money, Matthew," she said quietly. "You're going to need it." 30 minutes. That was all it took for Eliza to pack 5 years of marriage into a single leather weekender bag. She took no jewelry that Matthew had bought her, mostly because he rarely bought her any, and when he did, it was cheap costume jewelry he claimed was artistic. She took her clothes, her passport, in a small velvet box hidden at the back of her underwear drawer. She changed out of her dinner dress into a pair of dark tailored trousers, a silk blouse, and a trench coat. When she came downstairs, the house was silent. She could hear giggling coming from the living room. Matthew and Jessica were already celebrating. Eliza walked out the front door and closed it softly behind her. It was raining, a cold, biting drizzle typical of late November in Seattle. She walked down the long driveway, her heels clicking on the wet pavement. She didn't look back at the sprawling modern mansion she had kept clean for half a decade. Once she reached the main road, she stopped under the glow of a street lamp. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a burner phone. It wasn't her regular cell. Matthew tracked that one. This was a phone she had kept charged and hidden for 3 years just in case. There was only one number saved in the contacts. She pressed dial. It rang once, twice. "Report," a deep, gravelly voice answered. "No hello, no pleasantries." "It's done, Arthur," Eliza said. "I'm out." There was a pause on the other end, followed by the sound of movement, a chair scraping a glass being set down. Location: North Seattle, the Sterling residence. I'm on the curb. Status: calm, hostile extraction not required, but I need transport. And Arthur: "Yes, ma'am." "Tell him I'm coming home." "He already knows," Arthur replied, a hint of warmth finally entering his voice. "He's been tracking your vitals through the watch. He saw your heart rate spike during dinner and then flatline to total calm. He knew you made the decision before you even called." Eliza looked down at the simple black smartwatch on her wrist. Matthew had always hated it, calling it ugly and utilitarian. He never knew it was a prototype military-grade bio-tracker worth more than his car. "ETA?" Eliza asked. "Look up." Eliza tilted her head back. Through the mist and rain, she heard the rhythmic thrum of rotors. A black shape descended from the clouds, sleek and predatory. It wasn't a news chopper or a police unit. It was a Sikorsky S-76 painted in matte black with no registration numbers visible to the naked eye. The helicopter landed right in the middle of the empty suburban intersection, kicking up a spray of water. The side door slid open, and a man in a dark suit jumped out holding a large umbrella. "Mrs. Vance," the man said, bowing his head as he ran to shield her from the rain. "Mr. Thorne sends his regards." Eliza stepped into the helicopter. The interior was lined with cream leather and smelled of bergamot and aged scotch. She buckled herself in as the machine lifted off, leaving the suburban nightmare far below. She watched the lights of Matthew's house fade into the distance. He was probably popping champagne right now, thinking he had discarded a piece of trash. She pulled the small velvet box from her bag and opened it. Inside sat a ring, not a diamond, but a rare blue garnet glowing with an inner fire set in platinum. It was the ring she had taken off 5 years ago when she decided to live a normal life, to prove to herself she could be loved for who she was, not what she was. She had failed, or rather Matthew had failed. The pilot's voice came over the headset. "We are routed to Teterboro, Mrs. Vance. The jet is fueled and waiting. Flight time to Paris is 7 hours. "Paris?" Eliza asked. "Mr. Thorne is in Paris for Fashion Week. He said he's waited 5 years. He's not waiting another day." Eliza leaned back and closed her eyes. Sebastian Thorne. The name alone was enough to make stock markets tremble. A billionaire industrialist, a recluse, and the man who had once offered Eliza the world. She had walked away from him because she was young, overwhelmed by his intensity, and desperate for a simple life. She thought a simple life meant a simple man like Matthew. She had been a fool. Simplicity wasn't about poverty or anonymity, it was about honesty. Matthew was a liar. Sebastian, for all his dark power and ruthless business dealings, had never lied to her. The helicopter banked, heading toward the private airfield. Back at the house, Matthew was pouring champagne. "To freedom," he toasted, clinking his glass against Jessica's, "and to getting rid of dead weight." She was so pathetic. Jessica laughed. "Walking out in the rain. Where is she going to go? Her parents are dead. She has no money and she hasn't worked in years." "She'll come crawling back in a week," Matthew said confidently, "begging for a settlement. And when she does, I'll offer her a job as the cleaning lady." They both laughed, cruel and loud. Suddenly the house shook. The windows rattled in their frames. "What the hell was that?" Matthew asked, rushing to the window. He looked up just in time to see the dark silhouette of the helicopter banking sharply over his roof, the wash of the rotors tearing the leaves off his prize rose bushes. "Is that a military chopper?" Jessica asked, eyes wide. "No," Matthew whispered, squinting at the taillights disappearing into the clouds. "That's private. High-end." "Who do we know with a helicopter?" Jessica asked. "No one." Matthew said, a strange knot forming in his stomach. "Absolutely no one." The Gulfstream G650ER was a palace in the sky. As soon as Eliza stepped onto the tarmac at the private airfield, she was ushered up the stairs. The flight attendants, dressed in impeccable uniforms, didn't ask for her ticket. They knew her face. "Welcome back, Miss Vance," the lead stewardess said, handing her a hot towel. "It has been too long." "It has, Sarah," Eliza replied, remembering the woman's name. Eliza moved to the main cabin. It was empty save for a large bouquet of white peonies, her favorite, resting on the table. There was a note tucked inside. "My dove, the cage is open. Fly to me. S." She sat in the plush leather seat and watched the city of Seattle disappear beneath her. She felt the layers of Eliza Sterling, the submissive housewife, the cook, the cleaner, peeling away. She went to the bathroom and looked in the mirror. She looked tired. Her skin was pale. Her eyes had dark circles. Matthew had drained her. "Never again," she whispered to her reflection. She opened the amenities kit. It wasn't standard airline toiletries. It was filled with La Mer creams and Chanel cosmetics. Sebastian hadn't forgotten a single detail of her routine. 7 hours later, the jet touched down at Le Bourget Airport in Paris. It was morning in France, a crisp golden autumn day. A convoy of 3 black SUVs was waiting on the tarmac. As Eliza descended the stairs, the back door of the middle SUV opened. A man stepped out. He was tall, over 6'3", with broad shoulders, clad in a bespoke charcoal suit that cost more than Matthew's annual salary. His hair was dark, touched with silver at the temples, and his eyes were the color of a stormy sea, intense, intelligent, and currently locked onto Eliza. Sebastian Thorne, the Iron Wolf of Wall Street. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He simply stood there waiting. Eliza felt her heart hammer against her ribs. She walked across the tarmac, her pace quickening with every step until she was running. Sebastian opened his arms and she collided with him. He caught her easily, lifting her off her feet, burying his face in her neck. He smelled of rain, expensive tobacco, and safety. "I have you," he murmured against her hair, his voice vibrating through her chest. "I have you, Eliza." "I'm sorry." She choked out, tears finally spilling over. The tears she hadn't shed for Matthew came freely now. "I'm so sorry I left." "Hush," Sebastian said, setting her down but keeping his arms locked around her waist. He pulled back to look at her face. His thumb traced the dark circles under her eyes, his expression darkening. "He hurt you." It wasn't a question. "Not physically," Eliza said. "But he made me feel small, invisible." Sebastian's jaw tightened. A dangerous look passed over his face, terrifying to his enemies, but comforting to Eliza. "He will learn what it means to be small. I promise you that." He opened the car door for her. "Get in. We have a lot of work to do." "Work?" Eliza asked, wiping her eyes. "Tonight is the darker side of Fashion Week. The Obsidian Gala," Sebastian said as he slid in beside her. "Everyone who is anyone will be there. Investors, moguls, and architects seeking funding." Eliza froze. "Matthew?" "He's in Paris," Sebastian confirmed. "He flew commercial yesterday. He's been begging for a meeting with my holding company for months. He thinks he's on the verge of a breakthrough." Eliza looked down at her simple clothes. "I can't go to a gala. I have nothing to wear. I look like a wreck." Sebastian pressed a button, and the partition between them and the driver slid up. He turned to Eliza, taking her hand. "You are Eliza Vance. You were the youngest creative director at Vogue before you decided to play house. You have more style in your little finger than that man has in his entire lineage." He reached into the pocket of the seat in front of him and pulled out a tablet. "I have arranged a team. Hair makeup styling. And I called incredible favors from the archives of Versace and Dior. Tonight, Eliza, you don't just return. You ascend." Eliza took a deep breath. She thought of Matthew's sneer. She thought of Jessica's laughter. "Okay," she said, her voice strengthening. "Let's burn it down." The penthouse suite at the Hotel de Crillon overlooked the Place de la Concorde, offering a view of Paris that was reserved for monarchs and tycoons. Inside the suite was a hive of controlled chaos. Eliza sat in a velvet chair, a glass of chilled cucumber water in her hand while a team of 3 worked on her. She felt like a masterpiece undergoing restoration, layers of grime and neglect being carefully stripped away to reveal the vibrant colors underneath. "The skin is dehydrated," the esthetician, a petite Frenchwoman named Colette, murmured disapprovingly as she applied a serum that cost more than Matthew's car payments. "Stress, sadness, it sits in the pores." "It's being washed away," Eliza said, her eyes closed. She could feel the tension leaving her muscles. For the last 5 years, her morning routine had consisted of splashing cold water on her face and tying her hair back so she could start cleaning the house before Matthew woke up. She had convinced herself that this was humility. She realized now it was humiliation. "Open, please," said Justin, the stylist Sebastian had flown in from Milan. Eliza opened her eyes. Justin held up a garment bag. He unzipped it slowly. The dress was a weapon. It was a custom-made creation by Atelier Versace. It wasn't white innocent or bridal. It was a deep liquid gunmetal gray covered in thousands of tiny Swarovski crystals that caught the light with every movement. It looked like armor forged from starlight. The neckline was a daring plunge, the back entirely open, designed to show off skin that had been hidden under aprons and oversized sweaters for too long. Sebastian chose the color, Justin said, a knowing smile on his face. He said, "You are the storm that clears the air." Eliza stood up. Her hair, which she usually kept in a messy bun, had been blown out into cascading glossy waves that reached her mid-back. Her makeup was sharp, a smoky eye that highlighted the amber flecks in her irises, and a lip color that was the exact shade of a bruised plum. She stepped into the dress. It fit like a second skin. It held her, supported her, and forced her to stand tall. There was a knock on the heavy oak doors. The stylist stepped back, disappearing into the shadows of the room as if by magic. "Come in," Eliza said. The doors opened and Sebastian walked in. He had changed into a tuxedo that was cut so sharply it could draw blood. He stopped dead in his tracks when he saw her. For a man who controlled billions of dollars in assets, who had stared down hostile takeovers and Senate hearings without blinking, he looked utterly struck. He swallowed hard. "Eliza," he breathed. He walked toward her, not rushing, but with the gravitational pull of a planet. He stopped inches from her. He didn't touch her, not yet. He just drank her in. "Do I look okay?" Eliza asked, a ghost of her old insecurity surfacing. "Is it too much? Matthew always said I shouldn't draw attention to myself because—" "Matthew," Sebastian interrupted, his voice low and dangerous, "was terrified that if anyone else looked at you, they would realize he was holding a diamond in a handful of gravel. You were never too much, Eliza. He was just too little." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a long, thin velvet case. "I didn't buy this for you," Sebastian said, opening the case. "I retrieved it. It has been in my family vault for 3 generations. The Thorn Legacy Diamond." Eliza gasped. Resting on the black velvet was a necklace of white diamonds centering on a pear-shaped stone that was easily 20 carats. It was heavy, historical, and priceless. "Sebastian, I can't wear this. If I lose it—" "It belongs on your neck, nowhere else," he said, stepping behind her. She lifted her hair, and he fastened the clasp. His cold fingers brushed against the warm skin of her nape, sending a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. "There," he whispered against her ear. "Now you are ready." Eliza turned to the full-length mirror. The woman staring back wasn't the tired housewife who cried over a dry duck roast. This woman was a titan. She looked expensive, dangerous, and unattainable. "Who is she?" Eliza whispered. "That," Sebastian said, standing beside her, his dark suit contrasting perfectly with her shimmering gown, "is the woman who is about to bring Paris to its knees." He offered his arm. "Shall we—" Eliza took a deep breath. She thought of the guest cottage Matthew had banished her to. She thought of the cold rain. And then she looked at the diamonds around her neck and the man by her side. "Let's go," she said. The Louvre Museum had been transformed. The glass pyramid glowed from within, casting amber light onto the courtyard where a line of limousines deposited the elite of the world. The Obsidian Gala was the most exclusive event of Fashion Week, a place where business deals worth billions were whispered over glasses of champagne. Matthew Sterling adjusted his bow tie for the 10th time. It was tight. He felt out of place. He had spent a small fortune to get tickets to this event, money he had taken from the joint savings account he shared with Eliza just before asking for the divorce. He viewed it as an investment. He needed to meet Sebastian Thorn. Rumor had it that Thorn Capital was looking to invest in avant-garde architecture, and Matthew was convinced his portfolio would win the billionaire over. Beside him, Jessica was shivering. She was wearing a bright pink dress that she thought was high fashion, but amidst the sea of elegant blacks, creams, and golds, she looked like a highlighter pen. It was too short, too tight, and the sequins looked plastic under the harsh lights of the paparazzi. "My feet hurt," Jessica whined, leaning on Matthew. Why is the line so long? Tell them who you are." "Hush," Matthew hissed. "These aren't bouncers at a club, Jessica. That's the security detail for the Saudi royal family ahead of us. Just smile and look expensive." They finally made it inside. The grand hall was breathtaking, filled with sculptures and live orchestral music. Waiters with white gloves moved silently through the crowd. Matthew scanned the room desperately. "I need to find Thorne, if I can just get 5 minutes with him." "Is that him?" Jessica asked, pointing to a fat man near the buffet. "No, you idiot. Thorne is... he's a legend. Tall, dark, terrifying." They mingled, but it was painful. Matthew tried to strike up conversations with other guests, but as soon as they realized he was just a mid-level architect from Seattle with no major accolades, they politely excused themselves. The indifference was suffocating. Suddenly the music changed. The orchestra swelled. The murmuring crowd fell silent. At the top of the grand staircase, the doors opened. "Who is that?" someone whispered nearby. "Is that a movie star?" asked another. Matthew looked up. At the top of the stairs stood a man who looked like he owned the very air in the room. Sebastian Thorne. He was imposing, regal, and terrifyingly handsome. But no one was looking at him. They were looking at the woman on his arm. She was a vision in gunmetal and diamonds. She moved with a liquid grace, the light catching every curve, every crystal on her dress. Her head was held high, her expression one of cool, detached amusement. The massive diamond at her throat glittered like a captured star. Matthew squinted. There was something familiar about the way she walked, something about the tilt of her chin. "Wow," Jessica breathed, actually impressed. "Look at that dress. That must be worth more than your house." The couple began to descend the stairs. The crowd parted for them like the Red Sea. Photographers who had been bored all night suddenly went into a frenzy, flashes exploding like lightning. As they reached the bottom of the stairs, the woman turned her head slightly and laughed at something Sebastian whispered. The sound hit Matthew like a physical blow. He knew that laugh. He hadn't heard it in years, not since before the bills and the stress and his own ego crushed it out of her, but he knew it. "Eliza," he whispered. Jessica laughed. "What, that is not your frumpy ex-wife Matthew. That woman is... she's royalty or something. Look at the jewelry." But Matthew was moving. He couldn't help himself. He pushed past a waiter, spilling a tray of drinks, ignoring the gasps of indignation. He had to know. Sebastian and the woman were surrounded by a circle of admirers. The CEO of LVMH was shaking the woman's hand. A famous Hollywood director was kissing her cheek. Matthew shoved his way to the front of the circle. "Eliza!" he blurted out. The conversation in the circle died. The music seemed to stop. The woman in the gunmetal dress turned slowly. Her eyes, cool and sharp, landed on Matthew. There was no recognition in them at first, just a polite, distant curiosity one might show a rude stranger. Then a small, pitying smile played on her lips. "Hello, Matthew," she said. Her voice was smooth, cultured, lacking the tremor it used to have when he yelled at her. It is you," Matthew stammered. He looked her up and down, his brain unable to reconcile the woman who scrubbed his toilets with the goddess standing before him. "What are you doing here? How did you get in?" "She is with me," a deep voice rumbled. Sebastian Thorne stepped forward, placing a possessive hand on the small of Eliza's back. He looked down at Matthew with eyes that could freeze magma. "And who are you?" Sebastian asked, though he knew exactly who Matthew was. I'm Matthew Sterling," Matthew said, his arrogance battling with his shock. He straightened his tie, trying to salvage the situation. "I'm her husband," the crowd murmured. "Ex-husband," Eliza corrected effortlessly. "As of... what was it 24 hours ago when you threw the papers at me during dinner?" She said it casually, as if recounting a boring weather report. The crowd's murmur turned into a collective gasp of judgment. Eyes turned to Matthew with disgust. "Eliza, don't make a scene," Matthew hissed, his face turning red. "What is this? Did you rent that dress? Are you working as an escort?" Jessica finally caught up, grabbing Matthew's arm. She looked at Eliza, and for the first time in her life, Jessica felt completely inadequate. The cheap sequins on her dress seemed to burn her skin. "Matthew, let's go," Jessica whispered, sensing the danger. "No," Matthew snapped. He looked at Sebastian. "Mr. Thorne, I've been trying to reach you. I have a proposal, and since you're acquainted with my ex, maybe we can discuss it. I'm sure Eliza has told you about my talent." Sebastian looked at Matthew, then at Eliza. A dark amusement danced in his eyes. "She has mentioned you," Sebastian said. "She told me you found her cooking adequate and her presence background noise." Matthew paled. "Mr. Sterling." Sebastian continued, his voice raising just enough so the surrounding billionaires could hear. "My company invests in visionaries, men of character, men who recognize value. You held a woman who is capable of captivating Paris in the palm of her hand, and you treated her like a servant. That tells me everything I need to know about your judgment." "But business is business." Matthew tried sweating now. "My business is personal," Sebastian said, "and you have offended my partner." "Partner!" Matthew choked out. Eliza stepped forward, closing the distance between herself and Matthew. She smelled of rare orchids and ozone, nothing like the bleach and onions she used to smell like. "Matthew," she said softly, "you wanted passion. You wanted fire. You wanted to soar." She gestured to the glittering room, the waiting paparazzi, the man beside her who controlled the world. "I'm flying," she said, "and you're still on the ground worrying about the duck." She turned back to Sebastian. "I'm bored of this, darling. Shall we go to the VIP lounge? The air is a bit stale down here." "After you," Sebastian said. They turned their backs on him. Matthew stood there, the center of attention for all the wrong reasons. A waiter stepped up to him. "Sir," the waiter said icily, "you are blocking the flow of traffic. Please move aside." As Matthew was ushered away, he watched Eliza ascend the stairs to the VIP balcony, her hand firmly in Sebastian's. She didn't look back, not once. Jessica tugged on his arm. "Matthew, everyone is staring at us. We have to leave." I don't understand." Matthew muttered, his world tilting on its axis. "She was just Eliza." "No." A woman standing nearby, a famous fashion editor, said, sipping her champagne. "She was never just anything. You were just too blind to see it." 3 months had passed since the Obsidian Gala. For Matthew Sterling, they had been the longest 3 months of his life. The fallout from Paris had been subtle at first, like a hairline fracture in a dam. It started with phone calls not being returned. Then the invitations to charity dinners stopped coming. Then the contract for the new symphony hall. The project Matthew had banked his entire fiscal year on was abruptly awarded to a rival firm. Matthew sat in his office in downtown Seattle, staring at the rain streaking the floor-to-ceiling windows. The office was quiet. Too quiet. He had laid off half his staff the week before. "Matthew!" He turned. Jessica was standing in the doorway. She wasn't wearing high-end lingerie or bringing him wine anymore. She was wearing a raincoat and holding a cardboard box. "What are you doing?" Matthew asked, rubbing his temples. He had a permanent migraine these days. "I'm leaving," Jessica said, chewing gum. "My paycheck bounced again, Matthew. And frankly, this whole tortured artist vibe isn't cute when you can't pay for the lease on the Mercedes." "It's a cash flow problem," Matthew snapped, standing up. "It's temporary. Once the Dubai deal goes through." "There is no Dubai deal." Jessica cut him off. "I checked your emails. They pulled out. They said your recent designs lacked soul." She let out a cruel laugh. "Funny. That's exactly what you said about Eliza's cooking." "Don't say her name," Matthew roared. "She's on the cover of Architectural Digest this month, you know," Jessica said, twisting the knife. A 6-page spread on the restoration of a historic chateau in the Loire Valley. The headline calls her "The Hidden Genius Returns." Turns out everyone loves a comeback story. She dropped her key card on his desk. I'm going back to my parents' place. Don't call me. She walked out. Matthew didn't chase her. He didn't care. Jessica was a symptom of his ego. She was easily discarded. What terrified him was the letter sitting on his blotter. It was from the bank. Sterling Architecture was in default. He had leveraged his house, his car, and the firm's assets to fund the expansion he thought would make him a billionaire. Now the bank was calling in the debt. He had 48 hours to come up with $4 million or he would lose everything. He had made calls. He had begged old friends. He had even tried to call his mother, but she had hung up on him, ashamed of the gossip surrounding his public humiliation in Paris. His phone buzzed. It was a private number. "This is Sterling," he answered, his voice ragged. "Mr. Sterling." A crisp, professional female voice spoke. "This is the executive office of the Vanguard Acquisition Group. We understand you are in a distressed financial position." Matthew sat up straighter. "I am exploring options." "We are interested in acquiring your firm's assets," the woman said, "including the intellectual property in the downtown headquarters. We are prepared to offer a buyout that would clear your personal debts." Relief washed over Matthew so intensely he almost wept. Yes, I'm interested. Who is the buyer?" "The principal prefers to remain anonymous until the signing," the voice said. "If you are agreeable, a car will collect you tomorrow morning at 900 a.m. Bring the deed to the house and the corporate seal." "I'll be there," Matthew breathed. "I'll be there." He hung up and slumped back in his chair. He was saved. He would lose the company, yes, but he would walk away debt-free. He could start over. He was Matthew Sterling after all. He was the talent. He could build again. He walked over to the minibar and poured himself a whiskey. He looked at the empty spot on the wall where his diploma used to hang. He had sold the frame to a pawn shop yesterday. "I won," he whispered to the empty room, trying to convince himself. "I survived." The Cadillac Escalade that collected Matthew Sterling from his foreclosed office building was not a mere luxury vehicle. It was a fortress on wheels. The windows were tinted so dark that the world outside was reduced to a gray blur, and the doors shut with the heavy, reassuring thud of bulletproof plating. Matthew sat in the back, sinking into the cream leather seats. For the first time in 3 months, his heart rate began to slow. He adjusted his tie, catching his reflection in the darkened glass. He looked older, he admitted to himself. The stress of the bankruptcy, the humiliation of the Paris gala, and the silence of his phone had etched deep lines around his eyes. But that was all over now. Vanguard Acquisition Group. The name rolled around in his mind like a fine cognac. He didn't know who they were, likely a shell company for some foreign conglomerate looking for a foothold in American architecture, but he didn't care. They had offered a buyout, a lifeline. They were going to absorb his toxic assets, clear his debts, and if he played his cards right, keep him on as the lead architect. "They need me," Matthew whispered to the empty cabin, smoothing his suit jacket. "They're buying the brand, and I am the brand." He began to rehearse his pitch. He would be humble, but not weak. He would blame the market volatility for the firm's collapse. He would frame Jessica as a personnel error that had been rectified. He would convince this anonymous investor that Matthew Sterling was a sleeping giant ready to wake up. The car didn't head toward the financial district. Instead, it merged onto the highway heading north toward the industrial airfield. Matthew frowned slightly but quickly rationalized it. High-level billionaires often conducted business in transit or at private hangars to avoid the press. This was good. This meant serious money. 30 minutes later, the Escalade drove through a security checkpoint past a row of private jets and pulled directly into a massive, cavernous hangar. The engine cut out. The driver, a man with a neck as thick as a tree trunk, opened the door. "Inside. Keep walking until you see the table." Matthew stepped out. The hangar was vast, smelling of jet fuel and ozone. It was largely empty save for a single brightly lit area in the center. A long glass conference table had been set up there, surrounded by sleek modern chairs. A large projection screen stood behind it, displaying a rotating 3D model of a building. Matthew squinted. It was the Helix Tower, his magnum opus, the building that was supposed to put him on the map. Seeing it there glowing in high definition surged his confidence. They did admire his work. Two figures sat at the far end of the table. One was a man leaning back in the shadows, his face obscured. The other was the principal, sitting at the head of the table, back turned to Matthew, examining the screen. "Mr. Sterling," the driver announced, his voice echoing off the metal walls. "Delivery complete." Matthew straightened his spine and walked toward the light. "Good morning." He projected his voice using his best boardroom tone. "I appreciate the swiftness of this meeting. I assume we can dispense with the pleasantries and discuss the restructuring of my firm." The figure at the head of the table didn't turn immediately. The chair swiveled slowly, agonizingly, until it faced him. Matthew stopped walking. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. It wasn't an anonymous investor. It wasn't a banker. It was Eliza. But it wasn't the Eliza he had married. That Eliza wore soft cardigans and smelled of vanilla and apologized for taking up space. That Eliza had eyes that constantly sought his approval. This woman was a stranger. She wore a white power suit cut so sharply it looked like it could draw blood. Her hair, usually loose or in a messy bun, was pulled back into a severe architectural ponytail that emphasized the sharp angles of her cheekbones. She wore thick-framed black glasses that made her look intellectual, cold, and utterly terrifying. Sitting next to her, shrouded in a dark charcoal suit and an air of menacing calm, was Sebastian Thorne. "Sit down, Matthew," Eliza said. Her voice was different too, deeper. Gone was the hesitation. This was the voice of a woman who signed checks, not one who clipped coupons. "This," Matthew stammered, his brain misfiring. "This is a joke. Is this a joke? Did you pay the driver to bring me here to humiliate me?" "I said sit down," Eliza repeated. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. The command cracked through the air like a whip. Matthew sat. The metal chair was cold. He felt small, like a child called to the principal's office. "You can't be Vanguard," he said, trying to find his footing. "You don't have money, Eliza. I saw our bank accounts. You lived on the allowance I gave you." Eliza picked up a fountain pen, a Mont Blanc he recognized because he had always wanted one but couldn't afford it, and tapped it rhythmically against the glass table. "You saw the allowance you gave Eliza Sterling," she corrected. "You never looked past the surface, Matthew. That was always your flaw as an architect and as a husband. You care about the facade, but you ignore the foundation." She slid a thick leather-bound folder across the table. It slid effortlessly across the glass and stopped inches from his hand. "Open it." Matthew opened the folder. The first document was a birth certificate. Eliza Marie Vance. He stared at the name. It sounded familiar, ringing a distant bell from his college days studying industrial supply chains. "Vance," he muttered. "Like Vance Steel. Vance Steel, Vance Shipping, and the Vance Global Trust." Eliza listed her eyes, boring into him. "My grandfather founded the company in Pittsburgh 70 years ago. My father expanded it into international logistics. When they passed in the crash, I was the sole beneficiary." Matthew felt the blood drain from his face. Vance Steel was an industrial titan. It supplied the girders for half the skyscrapers in New York. If she was that Vance. "You're a billionaire," he whispered, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. "You've been a billionaire this whole time." "I am," she said simply. "Then why—" Matthew's voice rose, cracking with a mix of hysteria and indignation. "Why did you scrub my floors? Why did you let me worry about the mortgage? Why did you let me take out loans when you could have written a check and fixed everything?" "Because I didn't want to buy a husband, Matthew." Eliza slammed her hand on the table, the first crack in her icy demeanor. "I wanted a partner. I saw what money did to my father, how every woman he met only saw the dollar signs. When I met you, you were struggling, passionate, and you seemed to see me. So I hid the trust. I wanted to build a life with you from the ground up. I wanted to know that if we succeeded, we did it together. She leaned back, the ice returning to her eyes. But we didn't do it together, did we? I supported you. I edited your proposals. I managed your life. And the moment you got a taste of success, you decided I wasn't decorative enough for your new life. Matthew scrambled for a defense. I was under pressure. The firm, the stress. Save it. Sebastian spoke for the first time. His voice was a low rumble vibrating with suppressed violence. We are not here for a marriage counseling session, Sterling. We are here for business. Sebastian opened a file in front of him. Vanguard Acquisition is a joint venture between Thorn Capital and the Vance Trust. We have purchased the outstanding debt of Sterling Architecture from your creditors. So you bought my debt, Matthew said, a flicker of his old arrogance returning. That means you're my investors now. Fine. I can work with that. I can turn this around. With your capital and my genius. Stop! Eliza cut him off. She pressed a button on a remote. The image on the projection screen changed. It was no longer the 3D render of the Helix Tower. It was a scanned image of a cocktail napkin stained with coffee rings. On it was a rough sketch of a spiraling tower with detailed notes on the structural integrity of the curve. In the bottom corner of the napkin were the initials EV. Matthew stared at the screen. He remembered that napkin. They were at a diner 3 years ago. He had been stuck on the wind load problem for the tower. He was ready to quit. Eliza had grabbed a pen, sketched for 5 minutes, and solved a physics problem that had stumped his entire engineering team. Matthew swallowed dryly. That is the original concept for the Helix Tower, Eliza said. Created by me. She clicked the remote again. A new image appeared. A digital timestamp from a cloud server. This is the metadata for the waterfront park proposal, she continued. Author Eliza Vance. Last modified 3:00 a.m. while you were asleep after a networking dinner that ended with you stumbling home drunk. She clicked again, and again. Every major project Matthew had claimed credit for: the Opera House, the library extension. The stadium renovation was shown side by side with Eliza's original notes, timestamps, and corrections. You aren't a genius, Matthew, Eliza said, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. You're a draftsman. You took my ideas, my solutions, and my hard work, and you put your name on them. You convinced yourself that because I was your wife, my mind belonged to you. It's community property, Matthew shouted, standing up. We were married. What's yours is mine. Not anymore, Sebastian said. And certainly not when it involves fraud. Eliza closed the folder. Here is the situation. You are currently in default on $4 million of debt. The bank was about to foreclose. We stepped in. So you saved me, Matthew insisted, desperate to spin this. No, Eliza said. We own the debt, which means we have the right to seize collateral immediately. And since you signed the company assets, including all intellectual property, as security for the loans, we are seizing the IP. She looked at him with a terrifying calmness. I am taking back my designs, Matthew. All of them. The Helix Tower. It will be built, but under the Vance Thorn name. The awards you won, we are petitioning the board to have them rescinded based on proof of plagiarism. You are not just bankrupt. You are professionally erased. Matthew gripped the edge of the table. The room was spinning. You can't do this. I'll sue. I'll tell the press. Go ahead. Sebastian smiled, a predator baring its teeth. Tell the press that you stole your wife's work. Tell them that the visionary Matthew Sterling can't even use AutoCAD without his wife's help. Please. The press release is already written. We're just waiting for you to pull the trigger. Matthew slumped back into his chair. He looked at Eliza, really looked at her. He saw the strength he had ignored, the intelligence he had belittled, the beauty he had been too blind to see. He realized with a sickening lurch of his stomach that he had held a winning lottery ticket in his hand for 5 years and had thrown it in the trash because he wanted a shinier wrapper. "What happens now?" he whispered. "Now," Eliza said, standing up. "We conclude the transaction." She reached into the pocket of her pristine white blazer and pulled out a single crisp dollar bill. She placed it on the glass table. "I am acquiring Sterling Architecture and all associated assets for its fair market value." She slid the dollar across the table. $1. Matthew stared at George Washington's face. It was the ultimate insult. It was less than the price of the coffee she used to make him every morning. "Take it," Eliza commanded. With trembling fingers, Matthew took the dollar bill. "Get out," Sebastian said. Where do I go?" Matthew asked, standing up shakily. "My house." "Is ours?" Eliza said. "The locks were changed an hour ago. Your personal belongings, clothes, toiletries, that ridiculous espresso machine you bought, have been packed into boxes and left on the curb. I suggest you get there before it starts raining harder. Cardboard gets soggy quickly." "Eliza!" Matthew pleaded, his eyes filling with tears. "Please, I have nothing. No one will hire me. Jessica left me. My mother won't speak to me. You can't leave me on the street." Eliza walked around the table. She stopped inches from him. For a moment Matthew thought he saw a flicker of the old Eliza, the one who forgave everything. "I stood in the rain," Eliza said softly. "I stood in the rain with nothing but a bag of clothes because you wanted to make room for your mistress. You told me I was background noise. You told me to find my own way." She leaned in close, her scent expensive, floral, and cold, filling his senses. "I found my way, Matthew. Now go find yours." She turned her back on him. "Arthur, remove him." The large driver stepped forward, grabbing Matthew by the upper arm. It wasn't gentle. Matthew was marched toward the hangar door. "Eliza, Eliza, I love you," he shouted, his dignity completely gone. "We can fix this." The hangar doors hummed as they began to close. Matthew was shoved out onto the wet tarmac. The sky had opened up and a torrential downpour soaked him instantly. He stood there clutching his single dollar bill, watching the gap between the heavy steel doors shrink. Through the narrowing gap he saw Sebastian walk up to Eliza. He saw the billionaire wrap his arms around her waist. He saw Eliza lean back into him, her head resting on his shoulder, looking at the blueprint of her tower on the screen. Then the doors slammed shut with a final booming clang that sounded like a prison cell closing. Inside the warmth of the hangar, silence returned. Eliza let out a long, shaky breath. Her hands were trembling slightly. Sebastian turned her around, his large hands cupping her face. His thumbs brushed over her cheekbones. "You did it." "I did," Eliza whispered. She looked at the closed doors. "I thought I would feel guilty. I thought I would feel sad." "And?" Sebastian asked, searching her eyes. "I feel—" She paused, a genuine smile breaking across her face, lighting up the gloom of the hangar. "I feel light. I feel like I can finally breathe." Sebastian smiled back, a look of pure adoration on his face. "Then let's go. The pilot is ready. We have a meeting in Milan tomorrow, and I believe you have a skyscraper to build." "No," Eliza corrected him, taking his hand and leading him toward the waiting Gulfstream jet visible through the rear exit. "We have an empire to build." As they walked toward the jet, Eliza didn't look back at the closed hangar doors. She didn't think about Matthew Sterling standing in the rain, realizing too late that he had traded a diamond for a stone. She only looked forward toward the horizon, where her future was waiting, bright, golden, and entirely her own. And that is the story of how Eliza Vance went from a discarded wife to a queen of industry. Matthew learned the hardest lesson of all: never mistake silence for weakness, and never underestimate the person holding up your world. He thought he was the architect of his own success, but he was just standing on a foundation Eliza built, and when she left, the whole house came down. "What do you think?" Did Matthew deserve to lose everything, or was Eliza's revenge too harsh? I personally think he got exactly what he ordered. If you enjoyed this story of karma and transformation, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you never miss a story. We have a crazy mafia romance coming up next week that you won't want to miss. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.